And then as soon as you're out on the water and you're looking and you're counting, you realize that this is actually where the action is, not so much on the outer beaches, but here in the mudflats. And it's beautiful.
Okay, 7 more buffaloes.
British Columbia has hundreds of kilometers of rocky exposed shoreline. In fact, there are very few large complexes of protected water with extensive mudflat habitat. Tofino is one of those places. We know the area as the Tofino Mudflats Wildlife Management Area.
Unlike the dynamic and exciting open ocean coastline in and around Tofino, a lot of people overlook the mudflats. They think it's boring, but from an ecological point of view, it's actually a super rich habitat and it's actually pretty unique.
Our team of researchers with Raincoast Education Society is working to understand what animals use the mudflats year-round.
Lots of mudflats, we've got lots of eelgrass, and this habitat is an ideal place for wintering waterfowl. So birds that are done breeding, they fly south and then they spend the whole winter here, and there's lots of food for them. The weather's pretty mild, predation risk is relatively low.
It's important to understand what animals are using the mudflats because humans are also using the area. If we change our relationship and change our impact on the mudflats, we want to know which and how many waterfowl were using the mudflats before the change. Without regular surveys, there would be a lack of information about what waterfowl are using the area through time.
So we know that it's a really important area for ducks and geese and loons and grebes and cormorants. We know that because we see huge numbers of birds all winter long, but it's not really scientifically valid to say, oh, there are lots. We'd like to know how many, and we'd like to know what species, and we'd like to know how those trends shift throughout the year and throughout the season.
And so right now, the tide is rising and it's a little bit higher than it would be when you would see all of this is actually mud. So right now we're in about 0.7 feet of water and it looks like ocean, but pretty much from where we are into the trees is just mud flat.
We boat to the beginning of our survey area and look around. We look for waterfowl and follow the edge of the mudflat. We keep to the edge so we don't get stuck in the mud, and this also keeps some distance between us and the birds.
You can see here's like a chunk of the habitat that we're surveying, and so here you've got Browning Pass that's like quite deep, and on either side you've got all this green mud flat. And so right now we're looking at almost half of a nautical mile into shore, and that's all this like sandy mud habitat. And it's this part of the ecosystem that is being protected in the WMA.
Because the birds are so far away, we need to use binoculars. Our experienced observers can identify these waterfowl by species and get precise counts of the number of individuals present, even when they're diving underwater. The numbers we collect tell us about the diversity, or the number of species, and the abundance of waterfowl in the area.
190 widgeon and 4 bufflehead.
5 green-winged teal,
3 more mallards, 2 more widgeon. And the reason that's important is because we just don't have that data. So there are lots of concerns that increasing development, increasing use of this habitat, there's a huge commercial crab harvest that happens here. There's lots of wildlife viewing, lots of recreational boating. We don't think that any one of those things necessarily is having a negative impact, but there's no way to make a responsible assessment if we don't have a before and after comparison. And so ideally, someone would have been doing this 50 years ago or 30 years ago. Someone did in the 70s, and they collected like a couple years of data, and we're trying to assess how accurate that was, and also to get a really good contemporary baseline. So we're going to have 3 years of data at a minimum, and then hopefully, you know, if 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, people who live here have a whole new vision of how to use this habitat, they can make an informed decision about the impacts of those activities, at least on the waterfowl population. So our surveys, we do them twice a month. We're out here on the water for about 4 hours, and we just count a lot of birds, and it's really fun, and you really get to appreciate how much life there is in what seems to be a pretty peaceful, more or less barren habitat. And then as soon as you're out on the water and you're looking and you're counting, you realize that this is actually where the action is, not so much on the outer beaches, but here in the mudflats, and it's beautiful.
Okay, 7 more buffalo.